Good afternoon to most of you and good morning to some of you who are in Europe, or good night to people in the United States. I'm not sure about that. So I'm going to talk about automatic labeling of urban point clouds using data fusion. And this is shared work with Chris Eigenstein. We both work for the municipality of Amsterdam. So we try to, use artificial intelligence to make the life of our citizens a little bit better, hopefully. I'm going to talk about point clouds. So why point clouds? We believe point clouds are a very rich data source that can be used to accurately, map the public space, measure things, figure out where the objects in the city are located exactly, and also extract properties of those objects in the city, which can be very useful for better, targeted maintenance, for example, or better urban planning. So our point cloud looks a little bit like you see here in the picture on the slide. So we have the XYZ coordinates of laser scanned points in the city. Also, color information is present, intensity values. And this point cloud is recorded by a car, car driving around the city with a laser scanner on top. And it also means that the level of detail in this point cloud is much higher when you're close to a road. So obviously the road itself has high point density, but as you go higher up, for example, the tops of trees or the roofs of buildings are not so clearly captured in this approach. So kind of what do we want to do with this? Well, ideally, we want to know, using this data, where, for example, street lights are located, where traffic lights, traffic signs are located, where trees are located, etc. So we kind of want to achieve a situation like in the picture here, where we have figured out which points in this point cloud belong to each of the different types of objects that we're interested in. This is called semantic segmentation. So basically, we want to make sense of the scene by segmenting the point cloud into individual objects of various classes, which are then the semantics. Modern deep learning algorithms typically require large labeled data sets to train on. The issue here is that a data set that has been recorded in one city does not automatically translate to a different city because there are differences in types of buildings, in building style. There are differences in the appearances of objects like streetlights or traffic signs, and also vegetation might be largely different. If we would have a data set recorded in a more tropical climate with lots of palm trees, this would not necessarily translate to the slightly colder climate of Amsterdam. So kind of we need to create our own labeled data set. Doing this manually is a lot of work, and we kind of want to try and see if we can use smart data fusion with lots of other data that we have in the city in order to make it a bit easier for us and to automatically label already a large part of this point cloud. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. What kind of data sources do we consider? Well, here you see two. On the left, there's elevation data. This is available for the whole country, basically for the Netherlands. This is obtained using aerial laser scanning, so from airplanes flying around. And what you can see is that you can see, for example, the elevation level of the ground in greens and browns in this image. And you can see also the elevation level of buildings, which clearly stand out. So this gives some more information about, for example, the height of the building and where we would expect to find ground. We also, on the right, show some topographical information that is publicly available, which includes, for example, the footprint shapes of buildings here in blue, road parts segmented, which are indicated here in gray, for example, and certain pole-like or point-like objects such as traffic signs, trees, and lampposts, which are the little crosses here in the image. So we kind of want to merge these data sources, overlay them on the point cloud, and then see if we can label things automatically. So first of all, we look at ground. We use this elevation data of the Netherlands and basically find all the points in the point cloud that come within a small margin of error from the expected elevation. And what you can see in the image here is that this very accurately helps us to classify ground points in the image, or in the point cloud, I'm sorry. This is a large advantage that when you then remove the ground, all the other freestanding objects suddenly are nicely clustered. They're floating around by themselves and they're much easier to distinguish. Next, we look at buildings. We use footprint shapes of the buildings to do an initial labeling. We also limit the height of buildings by looking again at the elevation data. And then we use some region growing techniques to also include balconies, canopies, and other things that are kind of protruding from the facade of the building, which are not included in these footprint shapes. We then also label cars. We look for car-shaped clusters above road parts and label them as a car. So car-shaped is kind of, box-like with certain dimensions. We looked up, for example, the standard dimensions of typical personal vehicles and used those as threshold values to see if a box-shaped object might be a car or not. Next, we also label trees, lampposts, and traffic signs using similar approaches. In this case, we find pole-like objects near the location of where we expect to find them, and we label them as such. And in the final step, we have to check and correct the results of this initial labeling. So for example, what you see in this image, there's a tree here that was not detected by our algorithm. There's a traffic light here that was also not detected. And this is because for example, the location of this object differed too much from our reference topographical data. So our approach was not sure whether it should label this object. And since we want to initially create a very accurately labeled data set that we can use for training a deep learning algorithm, we do not care so much if we miss a few objects, as long as the ones that we do label are correct. And just to give you an idea, manually labeling this complete point cloud tile from scratch would take about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on the complexity. In our approach, the automatic labeling takes around half a minute, and the final step to check and correct manually to make sure that the data is accurate takes another 5 minutes. So we have a huge reduction in manual labor required to label these point cloud tiles. As a use case, we looked at the neighboring city of Weesp. We have 3,500 point cloud tiles of 50 by 50 meters. This is in total 7 billion points. We used our approach to label 109 tiles. This is only 3%. And then use these labeled tiles to train RandLANet, which is a state-of-the-art deep semantic segmentation model. And then what you can see in the image here is if we give our model a tile that was not labeled initially, the model is able to very accurately assess the type of objects that it finds. Obviously, types of objects that it has not been trained on, for example, these small little balls here at the corner of the street, will not be labeled accurately because the model has not seen any examples of those. So this is, at the moment, we've only labeled 6 different types of objects, so the model can only detect these 6 different types of objects. And what we can then do is say, okay, now given the labeling that our model has generated, where are all the street lights located in the city? And which different types are there? So for example, here you see a selection of street lights that were detected by the model. They have largely, different shapes, different types, which is also, why this data set is so interesting, but also why it's challenging. We can then look at features of these streetlights, for example, their height or their angle, to see if they're straight up or if they're slanted. And we can already use these features also to filter out some noise. For example, any object that is less than 3 meters high is most likely not a streetlight, because streetlights are typically larger than 3 meters. So this gives us a way to also find initial false positives. There are many opportunities with this kind of data. I just gave you a very brief introduction into what we're doing, but we're hoping to extend our approach to include more types of street furniture. We could ultimately apply this, for example, to change detection, see where things have changed. Maybe people have added another floor on their house. Maybe new trees have been planted, other old trees have been removed, etc. We can use it to enrich 3D models, digital twins of the city. We can map out the city in terms of accessibility by measuring clearances on the sidewalks, etc. We can potentially monitor tree health by measuring certain features and much more. So I think this is a very interesting data source, and I hope that our approach may help some of you to more quickly get started by doing semantic segmentation on these kind of point clouds. So yeah, very short presentation. Please have a look at our paper if you're interested. The code is available on GitHub if you want to try it out yourself. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Okay, thanks for that presentation. Is there any questions from the audience? Okay. Yes.
Hi Dan. I have a question. You have mentioned that the label data is used to process image segmentation. Right?
I'm sorry. What is the question exactly? It's hard to understand.
Did you mention that the label data is used to process the image segmentation tasks?
Yeah, so not really image segmentation because we're dealing with 3D data, so it's 3D point cloud segmentation. That's what we use the label data for.
So the data is not converted to the 2D version?
No. This is also something that could be interesting because, well, we have color information, so we could potentially convert certain parts of the scene to 2D images and then use traditional computer vision algorithms. This is something that we're considering, but we have not looked into it yet. But it could be an interesting follow-up.
Yeah. From different viewpoints, you can convert the 3D points, the 3D segmentations into 2D images of the labeled image segmentation training dataset. It will help the 2D image segmentation training. It's very interesting.
That's a very interesting idea, exactly. Because of the 3D information, we can indeed look from different angles at the same object and sort of generate a 2D image from the point cloud. That would be very interesting, yes.
Yeah, at a very large scale.
Yeah. Thanks for this suggestion.